Reverend Myung speaks on Restoration and Blessing, February 2nd, 1969, Tokyo, Japan. No one has ever realized that human history has been a history of restoration. The great accomplishment of the Unification Church has been to regard the events of history as a process of restoration. It is God who is the basis of this historical background. He has been in charge of all history up to the present and made all history develop. Because of God's will, individuals, families, tribes, and nations have been given missions of restoration, and through them, history has progressively developed. Therefore, the main question of history must be, when will this history of restoration be completed? When will the purpose of restoration be accomplished? The completion of restoration means the restoration of all the unaccomplished or unfulfilled standards. For example, the standard that was not accomplished by Adam due to his fall, and the standard that was not fulfilled by Jesus. These have to be restored through indemnity. This is the mission of the Unification Church. I am leading the way, and all the Unification Church members throughout the world are to follow. It is my mission to let all the members work to restore these unaccomplished standards. It is your mission to do so according to my direction. The man who has this important mission should be greater than Adam and should accomplish the standard in place of Jesus. The woman who is related to this man should go beyond Eve and be accepted as the new spouse of Jesus. The mission of the Unification Church is to give birth to such a man and such a woman. Jesus was crucified. Therefore, all the earthly foundation was completely lost. What Jesus did not accomplish should be indemnified by each one of us. In this way, each of us should go beyond Jesus. In order for us to indemnify what was lost, we must accomplish a standard in this world by going through all the historical struggles. Therefore, we are to be persecuted by everyone, and eventually we have to win them all over. Without this type of suffering cause, restoration through indemnity cannot be done. So far, this has been the path of the Unification Church. It has always been hit and persecuted, but we never protested. On the individual, family, tribal, and national levels, we have been persecuted and found ourselves in utmost loneliness. And we have had to console God in this kind of situation. This has been the whole history of the Unification Church. You should know that. No one can understand it. Only I know it fully. Jesus was opposed even by his three main disciples. The three disciples symbolize and represent three nations in the world. Therefore, when we pioneered our way on the worldwide level, we had to be opposed and persecuted by three nations. But even in the midst of these struggles, we had to set up indemnity conditions on the worldwide level. This is how we made a victorious standard through the first 7-year course, which ended in 1967. We are now in the second 7-year course, which started in 1968. The reason why we must be victorious in such a path of indemnification is because we have to restore the standards lost by the fall of Adam and Eve and at the time of Jesus. We have to indemnify everything, both internally and externally. The principle you are now studying records all that has been accomplished throughout history, but even this book cannot yet describe how to indemnify it all. I am struggling now in order to pioneer that course victoriously. Now, in Korea, the Unification Church cannot be defeated by any force. Our church cannot be eradicated from this earth. I have perfectly accomplished a victorious standard, a victorious foundation. Even if the evil side strikes the Unification Church, God can protect it and Satan cannot accuse it. This is the precious realm of victory which has been accomplished in the past 21 years centered upon my cause. It is a great joy for all history, the world and the cosmos, that in the last days, the living Christ, whom God sought during the 4,000 years of Old Testament history, the 2,000 years since Jesus' ascension, has completed the lost standard. No other gospel could be more wonderful than this. Nothing could be happier than this opportunity to fulfill both the vertical indemnity conditions and the horizontal indemnity conditions on earth. Restoration through indemnity must be done in a reverse way. In Adam's family, fallen Adam is to be restored through the unity between Cain and Abel. Therefore, unless we restore Cain and Abel, we cannot welcome the true parents as the Messiah. Therefore, the Lord of the Second Advent, who is one with God's heart, had to go through the thorny path and crucifixion of Jesus. Through utmost suffering, he had to solve all the problems and become a living sacrifice in order to obtain victory. Otherwise, the foundation of restoration cannot be made. Thus, the Messiah's first path was one of persecution from all directions. That kind of persecution has not been experienced in Japan. But in Korea, such difficult circumstances were endured in order that God's will might be fulfilled on the worldwide level, centering upon my mission. Therefore, the Unification Church began its course in prison. Where did the early Christian church start? It also began in prison. The history of the Christian church, or the Second Israel, started from a suffering position of persecution and imprisonment. In order to restore this, we have to indemnify it first. Therefore, the Unification Church made its debut in a prison so that God could work directly with our church. The difference is that when Jesus was imprisoned, his disciples escaped and were scattered. But now, you should do the reverse. Even in the face of a terrible, desperate situation, we all should unite with each other and stand boldly in the face of death. It took as many as 21 years to come up from the bottom to go through God's providence of salvation. Originally, if the central religion in the chosen nation had accepted the Messiah, restoration would have taken only 7 years. Since we could not gain that acceptance, we had to go through a course of 21 years. You know something of the first 7-year course after 1960, but not its full background. Behind this course was the history of God's family and the history of a God-centered tribe. In order for you to understand this history, you should receive the blessing. I cannot reveal this background unless you receive and inherit the victorious standard of the blessing. When you know that course completely, you will feel how bitter the history of restoration has been. Therefore, we have to realize how precious the blessing is. If we desire the blessing, we should concentrate first on how to live solely for God's will. When Jesus prayed in Gethsemane, he prayed that not his own will, but God's will be done. He did not choose the path of the cross because of his own will. Unless, like Jesus, you are confident of being able to overcome the problems of life and death, you cannot welcome or walk the path of restoration. Are you confident enough to dedicate your life for God's will? If you take this course, you should know you cannot go alone. You must be able to relate to all people and be able to console those who are going to follow you on this path. Are you really ready to sacrifice your life? You cannot think, I am a young girl with a beautiful face. I can be welcomed anywhere I go, and I have no particular defects. A girl like me cannot do sacrificial work. Or, I am a man with a great physical body and handsome appearance, with a great family. Whatever I want, I can get very easily. So, as such a wonderful man, I cannot do such rigorous sacrificial work. What's more, you should not be bitter about walking a sacrificial path. When Jesus was shouldering the cross, he could have deplored his situation saying, I should not have to do this kind of thing. I have not yet married. Even though I am a 33-year-old man, my mission and my value have not yet been realized. But Jesus could not think that way. Death was not a problem for him. He was ready to sacrifice his life, and the weight of the cross that he was shouldering could not deter him. Although he fell down physically, he didn't waver internally because of his great stamina. No other man in history has ever had such a strong determination connected with God. And because of Jesus' great strength, human history took a new direction. This became God's new starting point on earth. 2,000 years have passed since that time, but the Spirit of Jesus has not passed away. Instead, it has been inherited by millions of people. How happy we can be today to inherit such an important mission, the tradition of Jesus. Therefore, it doesn't matter if we lose our lives. We should cry out in the darkness of death and shatter that darkness by the light of God's heart. We should make that light shine throughout the world. We must become that kind of man or woman. This is the challenge. Originally, the fall of man meant death. Salvation means the overcoming of death. If we are determined to be saved, we should be willing to be bold. If we succeed, the world will head in a new direction. We should be excited. Are you confident that you can overcome the problems of life and death? I have faced issues of life and death many times. Hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of times. Although I may face suffering and pain, although my legs may be cut off and my eyes extracted, and even if I'm beheaded, I'm still strongly determined to complete that course I started. My conviction is absolute. The other day, a group of about 50 people from Japan came to Korea and visited the holy ground in Busan. It is right next to a cemetery in a stony place where no one lives. On that site, I built a small hut of cardboard and mud many years ago. It was far from a glorious place. But even when I was sleeping there, I was walking the path of filial piety before God as His Son. My quest was a deep internal standard that no one else had been able to attain. At that time, I had no external possessions. I had no money. I had a beard and an unwashed face, so I looked dirty, and I wore an assortment of Western and Oriental clothes. But everywhere I went, I spoke about very big things, things that were bigger than a cannon, more explosive than an atomic bomb, so huge that everybody was surprised and ran away. I have endured tremendous hardship all my life, but you may not be able to understand it. It would take as much as 50 years to explain it. But my conclusion is that no matter how much suffering you may experience in your activities, and no matter how much you are persecuted by your environment, you should be able to always remain standing before the face of God. Although Jesus left the earth through the cross, the standard of filial piety He impressed upon God's heart remained, and God had to respond to it. Although Jesus did not seek a reply from God, nevertheless, God's heart could not help but reach out to Him. Jesus was the first true child of God after 4,000 years of biblical history. There are about 300 people gathered here. If you all are determined to do the same thing as Jesus, the 43 provinces of Japan will be restored. Victory comes out of the internal determination made at the outset of a venture, not somewhere midway. You should understand this. Even if you can get victory over hundreds of life and death situations, you need still more determination before you can win the eternal victory that God has sought. A place out of Satan's reach. You may wonder if your suffering in the midst of a bitter environment will help the restoration process. But I have already calculated these factors exactly, so that what the Unification Church teaches can move history and become the true history. I am teaching what no one else was able to imagine. In Japan, everybody is talking about the Unification Church. They are wondering why these young people seem to be wasting their youth, walking the path of suffering. Some of you had even entered the University of Tokyo and were admired by your relatives. However, because you joined the Unification Church, your families were devastated. There are many of you who are in that situation. But if you are going to be great men and women, you should walk on the stage of the entire world. No matter how you may suffer in Japan, that suffering is not enough for you to be able to enter the ideal realm of God. What is the Unification Church? It is the church whose quest is to establish the standard whereby we may enter the ideal realm of God. Therefore, now that you know this, you have to focus upon that greater value in your life. In the time of Jesus, the three main apostles, the 12 apostles, the 70 and 120 disciples, all became faithless. Therefore, in the end, Jesus had to go to the cross. We have to indemnify this and resolve to return to God at the risk of our lives. Otherwise, the cause of restoration is impossible. We have to go through the path of persecution and take responsibility at the national level. We have to be determined to restore all things perfectly within 3 generations. 3 generations are needed because 3 is a principal number, and the 4-position foundation develops in 3 stages. With this kind of determination, we have to endure persecution and overcome all obstacles. Jesus came as the true parent or true father, but Judas Iscariot betrayed him. In his act of betrayal, all mankind was represented. Through him, all human beings, as the offspring of traitors, betrayed their true parent. Hence, we must make an indemnity contribution to indemnify the act of having sold the true parents. For 30 pieces of silver, one man banished the true parents from this earth and completely frustrated God's providence of 4,000 years. At that moment, Satan prevailed on the earth. To indemnify this, we have to offer this amount of money symbolized by the number 3 for 4 years as the price for having sold the true parent. The 4 years represented East, West, South, and North. In Korea, this means we must give 3,000 won, or $30 every year for 4 years. That money should be earned through your sweat and tears. And when you earn that money, you should think about God's will more than your own life. That money should be donated to God with this heart. Also, Jesus' 3 disciples should have united with him, but instead they deserted him. The 12 apostles and 70 and 120 disciples were also faithless. Therefore, in the cause of indemnity, we have to restore all of this. Thus, we each must find 3 spiritual children, and centering upon them, find 12, then 70, and then 120 followers. This is what I have been doing for the last 21 years. Because Jesus could not accomplish this on earth, he and God were overcome with sorrow. The mission of the Unification Church is to solve these sorrows. This is our formula course. We have to restore our tribes, establishing our position as new ancestors. And we have to restore Japan, Asia, and the rest of the world, thus developing God's providence of restoration on a worldwide level. For the Holy Wedding in 1960, We had to set up all the indemnity conditions of the 4,000 biblical years before Jesus and the 2,000-year history after Jesus. The content of that holy wedding was worldwide and cosmic. But in actuality, very few people witnessed it. At that time, we still faced unimaginable persecution. The preparation period from 1953 to 1960 was a time of fierce persecution. During that time, more than 3 million people, 3 major Christian denominations, and 3 governments in Korea opposed us. In spite of this, we had to bring forth victory by establishing indemnity conditions. That was the background of my holy wedding in 1960. That wedding day determined the destiny of the Unification Church. It was a great event for the world and the cosmos. All the vertical indemnity conditions on the worldwide level were restored horizontally on earth through my mission because I had brought victory both spiritually and physically. One requirement was to restore 3 disciples before my own blessing, representing the 3 disciples who deserted Jesus 2,000 years ago. Adam and Eve fell as a betrothed couple. Therefore, restoration cannot be done by one person alone. Salvation cannot be completed by a man alone. Neither can a woman go to heaven alone. Therefore, a man and a woman together must solve the problem. To establish the standard of Adam and Eve as true parents on this earth, we had to set up the conditions centered on the engagement of 3 disciples. God's aim was to restore Adam's family, but Cain's and Abel's failures shifted the dispensation to Noah's family. Through Noah's family, all human beings in the world were judged by the flood in order to eradicate Satan's invasion at the fall. This was God's providence for salvation on this earth. Later, responsibility was shifted to the family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and still later to Moses and then Jesus. So we can see that God's providence for salvation has been prolonged several times. Therefore, we must indemnify that path. In order to indemnify the standard of Adam's family and establish the true parents, we must first restore Adam's 3 children. Jesus absolutely needed 3 disciples, symbolizing the 3 archangels in the Garden of Eden. Because these archangels did not all unite with Adam and Eve completely and serve them, the fallen world came into being. In order for perfect true parents to accomplish their position, they need 3 disciples equivalent to the 3 archangels who can serve them completely. Unless this is done, Satan cannot be eradicated from this earth. The whole history of a Cain-type people disobeying Abel-type people is restored through the Lord's 3 disciples. They represent the 3 archangels in the spirit world and Cain in the 3 major providential periods, that is, in the Old Testament, New Testament, and completed Testament periods, or Cain in Adam's family, Cain at Jesus' time, and Cain at the time of the second coming. To indemnify completely this kind of history, the Lord of the second advent, representing Jesus, who in turn represents the first Adam, must raise up 3 chief disciples who represents the 3 Cains. In the spiritual world, there are 3 archangels. In the physical world, 3 spiritual children need to follow their Abel absolutely. 3 disciples need to remain faithful in spite of persecution. This standard was established in April 1960. Since the course of restoration is the reversal course, those who are in the position of children should be blessed first. 3 disciples or 3 children are to establish that requirement. After engaging the 3 disciples, who signified the resurrection of Adam's 3 sons, Cain, Abel, and Seth, the true parents stood in the position of substantial parents, as declared in the Holy Wedding of 1960. God had resentment towards Adam's family, but the true parents were able to forge a unity between parents and 3 children for the first time on earth. This was done in 1960 in Korea. That, therefore, was the historical event which began a new history. In April 1960, the first stage of blessing centering upon the number 12 took place. Historically, this is the equivalent of restoring Jesus' 12 disciples. The Bible talks about 12 gates to heaven. The number 12 is central in the history of Israel. Only by indemnifying this history can the ideal of Christianity, which has operated only a spiritual mission, take root here on this earth, both spiritually and physically. God's great sorrow has been that, since the fall, He could not maintain any foothold on this earth, on the individual level, family level, or national level. In order to heal this sorrow, we should first accomplish restoration on the individual and family levels. There were 12 families from Adam to Noah's time, including Cain and Abel, Shem and Ham. There are also 12 families from Noah to Abraham's time, including Isaac and Jacob. The resurrection of 12 people in the blessing means the resurrection of all the ancestors from the time of Adam to Abraham. In other words, a vertical indemnity condition was horizontally accomplished. Therefore, although there were 10 generations from Adam to Noah, providentially, there were 12 generations when Cain and Abel are included. Therefore, in the substantial realm, 12 disciples were blessed as an indemnity condition. This brought the victory to the second position, which Satan has always been accusing. Noah's family represented Adam's family. Since I established the foundation to resurrect Noah's family, I was able to resurrect the 12 generations from Adam to Noah, including Cain and Abel. The resurrection of those in the spiritual world and the liberation of the spiritual world was accomplished through my foundation on earth. The standard for restoring Adam's family, Noah's family, and Jacob's family could be established only with the blessing of Jacob's family. For the first time in human history, at the blessing of the 36 couples, this vertical relationship was completely established horizontally. The first, second, and third groups of families to be blessed are regarded respectively as Adam's family, Noah's family, and Jacob's family. Adam's family was represented by the first 12 blessed couples. Those who had been previously married, centering upon their own desires. Noah's family was represented by the second 12 blessed couples. Those who had not been married, but who had been seeking marriage and love. Jacob's family was represented by the third 12 blessed couples, those who had been pure. Through this blessing of 36 couples, the fortune of the Unification Church and the foundation of the unity of heaven and earth was determined. This brought horizontal victory to the vertical history, which has been filled with many failures that have caused God so much agony. This victory has also linked the spiritual world to the physical world. Now God has a foothold on the earth. Now that God could dwell on earth, the development on the worldwide level on this earth could begin. In the 7 years after 1960, God's coming to the earth was to be completed. This required the restoration of children. In the past, Cain's could not obey Abel's, prolonging human history for thousands of years. In order to indemnify this, Cain and Abel should be united in one family at this time. This was indemnified through the blessing of the 72 couples, 36 representing Cain's family and 36 representing Abel's family. Through this blessing, the four-position foundation that our ancestors could not establish was realized, and Satan was forced to retreat. Following the blessing of 72 couples, the blessing of 124 couples established the standard of worldwide development centering upon the true parents. The 124 couples symbolize the heads of all the nations of the world. For Jesus to begin spiritual restoration on the worldwide level, he needed 120 disciples. In the same way, as head of the Unification Church, I had to start my substantial course with 124 blessed couples. This I accomplished within 21 years. After finding the people whom he was seeking, God undertook the restoration of all things. The establishment of the holy grounds means the blessing of all things. Thus, 120 holy grounds were established in 40 nations throughout the world in 1965. This was the turning point of our fortune. One of the most wonderful days is Parents' Day. We fallen men were unable to have parents in whom God could rejoice. But since our true parents were restored, joy has returned to God and man. Next, we established Children's Day. Until now, mankind has not been able to celebrate these wonderful days because we could not fulfill the cause of restoration. But now the great gospel has been accomplished historically. Finally, God's Day was declared on 1st January 1968. The declaration of God's Day made God's presence on earth possible and assured the daily advancement of the Unification Church. Now we can work toward the liberation of the spiritual world as well as the earthly world, and also the liberation of hell, centered upon the truth of the divine principle. Because God's Day has been declared, we can return to a situation where hell and Satan have no hold. When God's Day was declared, my mission was completed. For many years, I had been persecuted by Korea and by the established churches. Just as Jesus had been persecuted by leaders of Judaism, through his new gospel, Jesus had to pioneer a formula course to gain acceptance by Judaism and remove its failures. Trying to establish a new second Judaism occupied his 3-year public ministry. This involved raising the dispensation from the individual level to the family level, and from there to the tribal and national levels. Jesus wanted to establish the eternal victorious standard, both spiritually and physically, so that Israel might be liberated from Satan. Nevertheless, he was prevented from doing so. Just as Jesus was persecuted by leaders of Judaism, I was persecuted by the established churches here, and in the midst of this, I had to fight to restore everything. In 1945, the situation was such that I had to go to Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, into Satan's camp. I had to leave Seoul and my homeland, which God had been blessing, and where He had a certain foundation, and go to the headquarters of God's enemy. Unless I overcame the condition of Satan's accusation in this situation, I could not start a second time. This is the reason why I had to live in prison in a communist country. In prison, I had to gain 12 disciples to restore the situation of Jesus, who was completely deserted by all his 12 disciples while he was in prison. In this way, a new history was able to start from prison. After accomplishing this condition, I was able to return to the south, where I still had to endure all kinds of accusation and opposition from the established churches. We labored for many years to establish a new movement capable of surpassing all the established churches in order to fulfill God's providence. This is the Unification Church in Korea. A few months ago, on September 10, 1968, we opened the Academy House and invited all the Christian leaders. Those who responded were leaders of the Christian churches who strongly opposed the Unification Church. About 40 people came. All of them looked very arrogant, yet I welcomed them boldly. Actually, I was so happy that such a time had come. These Christian leaders had been fighting the Unification Church for many years. They used to think that we were insignificant, poor, and miserable people, but now they could see that Reverend Moon was not the man they had imagined. This time they were able to welcome me and acknowledge the Unification Church. The Unification Church has become a serious challenge to Korea. We are a most feared group, and I am regarded as an awesome leader. Established Christianity could not meet the challenge of the Unification Church. They could not defeat the theory of our church. Therefore, they are now advising each other not to deal with the Unification Church. Through enduring persecution, we have pioneered the way of restoration. Even though the entire world is against us, we will be bold. No matter how many times we may die for God, we will definitely do God's will. This has been a riddle for the established churches. I have solved all the insoluble historical problems that had confronted God for 6,000 years of history. Success has been made. Even if I should die now, the unification theory will prevail in the world. No matter how much the entire country of Japan is mobilized against us, unificationism will never be defeated. Does God need Japan? He does not need it for itself. He needs it because He needs the world, the spiritual world, the earthly world, and the cosmos. God created the world environment first, preparing everything for this time. Therefore, if we do our small part now, the entire world will move. We are living in such a period. You young people should never presume that God does not exist. God certainly exists, but He is not God in the abstract, but God at work in our lives. He is not just a being of feelings, but a being of practice. How wonderful this is! Unless we complete the course of restoration on the individual, family, tribal, national, and cosmic levels, thus establishing a standard which Satan cannot accuse, we will not be able to establish the condition for the blessing. In 1960, we reached the top level of the growth stage, from which Adam and Eve had fallen. In order for true parents to attain the realm of perfection, a period of 7 years was needed, representing 7 stages. That constituted the first 7-year course. When we enter the standard of perfection, we go into the realm of God's direct dominion. Direct dominion means to be in a direct relationship with God, both internally and externally. That is the standard of dominion both in heart and in life. In 1960, the blessing was attained, but not the true level of perfection. The world was still in the realm of Satan's dominion. Therefore, Satan could attack the holy true family. Nevertheless, we have overcome all opposition during these 7 years, establishing Parents' Day, Children's Day, Day of all things, and finally, God's Day. Therefore, the standard of perfection was completely established on earth. God has been seeking the day when a bridegroom and a bride could meet, overcoming the opposition of Satan. For the past 2,000 years of Christian history, the bridegroom was Jesus working in heaven, and the Holy Spirit, representing the feminine aspect of God, was working on the earth. But through the unification church, heaven and earth have been completely united, removing Satan's existence as an obstacle between heaven and earth. The ultimate purpose of religious people has been accomplished. If this tribe grows day by day, it will constitute a nation and then expand to the level of the world. Hence, a new nation, a third Israel, will be created. Although you are Japanese, you are no longer children of Japanese ancestors, but God's children in a new blood lineage. The Unification Church has made this possible. We stand in a different place. This is the victorious realm that takes away Satan's accusation. In what position are you standing? Unless you have reached the perfection level of the growth stage, you are not qualified to become blessed. At the fall, one man and one woman were driven out of the Garden of Eden. Therefore, in the course of restoration, one man and one woman have to overcome a hostile environment. This is the meaning of the blessing. My own God's Day, Parents' Day, Children's Day, and Day of all things have been declared on the worldwide level and on the cosmic level. You can be blessed and can participate in that kind of realm. But you have not gone through the same path that I went. Actually, as true ancestors of a new lineage, you have to establish your own Parents' Day. Also, you should establish your own Children's Day, Day of all things, and God's Day. All of those things the members of the Unification Church should do. This is the reason why we started the second 7-year course. Although you are the descendants of the fall, you should surpass the standard of Adam and Eve, marching forward boldly by subjugating Satan's accusation. This is what is meant by total advancement. Not only ourselves, but the entire world should be doing that. Both men and women and old and young should do that. The second 7-year course is the period of total advancement. During my 21-year course, I only regret that I have not yet been able to convey the truth and witness to my relatives. Such was also Jesus' regret. I could not speak about my own mission to my relatives. Of course, my parents and brothers and sisters were able to feel that I was some kind of a great man doing something great. But I have never been able to speak about the precious meaning of the principle to them. This has been my agony. I could not give love to my parents or my own brothers and sisters, even though they were physically very close to me. Instead, I had to love the people on the side of Cain more than my own relatives. Because of this, however, the Unification Church has been able to advance. Unless you love that way, you cannot win the heart of your Cain. Without Cain, Abel cannot stand. Unless you raise people who have much more filial piety toward you than your own physical children, you cannot do the work of restoration through indemnity. But to do so means great suffering. Unless you love people without eating and sleeping, you will not be able to dominate them with love. I have been in those circumstances and have been attempting to create the victorious foundation that way. You are different from me, however. In the second 7-year course, you can give your precious things directly to your own relatives, parents, and brothers, so that you can become the messiahs to your own relatives. During the second 7-year course, you should be the Messiah of your tribe, and you should accomplish with your relatives what Jesus and I could not do. And by achieving victory in your own tribe, centering upon your parents and your brothers and sisters, you can complete everything. You can do that on the individual level, family level, tribal level, and national level. And you can open the way to the entire world that way. The starting point and mission of the second 7-year course is to do what Jesus wanted to do 2,000 years ago. To reveal God's will to Mary and Joseph and let them participate fully in His dispensation. I was in a position to do that, but if I had loved my own relatives first, then God's providence of restoration would not have advanced. Always, our beloved people have to be sacrificed and are asked to shoulder the cross. God's providential course has shown us that we must sacrifice our own beloved children, family, and tribe, and love Satan's families, Satan's tribes first. God loves and blesses His enemies. When Jesus was crucified, He prayed to God, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Jesus could say that because He knew God's heart. The cause of restoration cannot be achieved by the power of the fists, but by the power of heart. The completion of the indemnity must be done that way. We must know that. We must attain the blessing which Jesus did not attain. That way, perfect restoration and blessing can be attained.